Hello and welcome to Horror Echo. Tonight we've rounded up some of the scariest and most terrifying stories for your enjoyment. So, dim the lights, get cozy, and get ready for some pure horror. Let's begin. Story 1, The Whispering Woods. Deep in the heart of a remote forest, there's a patch of forest that the locals call the Whispering Woods. Few dare to enter, and those who do rarely return. Legend has it that the woods are cursed, haunted by the souls of those who died there long ago. Last summer, a group of friends decided to head into the woods, laughing off the warnings of the locals. They brought tents, supplies, and enough courage to last a weekend. The first night, as they sat around the campfire, they heard faint whispers. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere, but no one was in sight. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked in a shaky voice. "It must be just the wind," the other replied, though her eyes peered nervously into the darkness. But the whispers were getting louder, more distinct. Now they could hear the words, "Go, turn, run." Panic set in its shadows began to move through the trees, drifting out of sight. As the group tried to leave, they realized that the path they had taken into the forest had disappeared. The forest seemed alive, moving and closing around them. Only one of the friends managed to get out, and they refused to talk about what happened that night. But sometimes, if you're near the edge of the Whispering Woods, you can still hear voices, warning you to stay away. Story 2, The Phantom Room. Emily was thrilled to finally move into her first apartment. It was in an old building in the city center, with creaky floors and a charming vintage feel. The landlord had warned her about the strange history of the place, but Emily had dismissed it as old-fashioned superstition. On the second night, she discovered a locked door in her apartment that she had not noticed before. Curious, she asked the landlord about it. "That room, it's best to leave it alone," he said cryptically. "Just forget it's there." Emily couldn't help herself. With a pin, she broke the lock and opened the door. Inside was a small, dusty room with a single rocking chair in the middle. The air was icy, and she was overcome with an overwhelming sense of dread. That night, Emily woke up to a creak. The rocking chair was moving on its own. A figure sat in it, a dark woman with empty eyes. Emily froze in horror as the figure slowly turned its head toward her. The next morning, the door was locked again, and the rocking chair was gone. But Emily could still hear it creaking every night behind the locked door. Story 3, The Hitchhiker Who Disappears. Late one evening, Jake was driving home on a deserted road. It was raining, making it difficult to see. As he turned the corner, his headlights illuminated a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young woman, soaked to the bone, with her thumb outstretched. Feeling sorry for himself, Jake stopped. The woman climbed into the car, her clothes soaking wet. "Thanks for stopping," she said quietly. "I live only a few miles down the road." As they drove, Jake tried to start a conversation, but the woman remained silent, staring out the window. When they reached her address, Jake turned to say goodbye, but she was gone. The seat was dry, and there was no sign that she had ever been there. Stunned, Jake knocked on the door of the house. An elderly woman answered, and when he described the hitchhiker, she turned pale. "That's my daughter," she said. "She died in a car accident on this road 10 years ago." Story 4, The Ghosts of Hollow Creek. The Hollow Creek Manor had been abandoned for decades, its windows broken, and ghostly moans echoing in the halls. The town's explorers often challenged each other to spend the night inside, but none of them lasted until morning. One Halloween, a group of thrill seekers decided to document their experiences for a YouTube channel. Armed with cameras and flashlights, they entered the manor, laughing and joking to hide their fear. As night fell, strange things began to happen. The door closed on its own, and the living room piano played a haunting melody despite being broken. The group's laughter turned to screams when they saw a figure at the top of the stairs, a woman in a tattered wedding dress, with a pale face and empty eyes. One by one, the researchers disappeared, their cameras recording only static. To this day, footage occasionally appears on the internet, but no one knows what really happened at Hollow Creek Manor. Story 5: The Weeping Mirror. Mia had always loved antique shops. One day, she found an exquisite mirror with a gilded frame, the surface of which was slightly tarnished. It was beautiful and strangely captivating, so she bought it and hung it in her bedroom. That night, Mia woke up from a soft cry. She looked around her room but couldn't find anything out of place. Then she noticed, said the mirror. The reflection didn't match her room. Instead, it showed a dimly lit hallway with peeling wallpaper. In the center of the hallway stood a woman in a tattered dress, her face buried in her hands as she sobbed. Terrified, Mia tried to cover the mirror, but the crying only grew louder. The next morning, the mirror was gone, replaced by a note that read, "Thank you for freeing me." To this day, Mia refuses to speak of what happened, and she avoids mirrors at all costs. Story 6: The Shadow in the Attic. After inheriting her grandmother's old house, Sarah decided to spend the weekend cleaning it out. The place was dusty and filled with cobwebs, but it had a certain charm. As she sorted through boxes in the attic, she found an old diary. The entries were disturbing, describing how her grandmother had been tormented by a shadowy figure that haunted the house. That night, Sarah heard footsteps above her, even though she was alone. She ventured into the attic, flashlight in hand, and saw the shadow, a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes. It lunged toward her, and she screamed, dropping the flashlight. When she woke up, she was lying on the living room floor. The attic door was sealed shut, and no amount of force could open it. Sarah moved out the next day, leaving the house to its ghosts. Thank you for joining us for these terrifying tales. Remember, the scariest stories often hide in the shadows of reality. Sleep well, if you can,